Okay, everyone, it's time to grab those Werther's Originals because we are talking grandparents today.
Well, that's the topic of the day today. Movies that shaped our relationship with our grandparents. This is Karan from San Francisco.
And this is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds. We're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. Karan, you told listeners of the specific topic here, so it is grandparents. So we've had episodes in the past about relationships with our parents and our siblings. So we figured, why not go back one generation and give it up for the grandparents on this episode and talk about the movies that kind of helped shape our relationships there.
This also is emblematic of just us entering the holiday season. I always somehow associate the holidays with, spending time with grandparents. As, when it grows up, you move around and such, but you know for sure that you're going to be back with everybody during the holidays.
Maybe, Karan, just to give listeners some context, why don't you just give us kind of a background on your grandparents and your relationship with them growing up before we jump into the movies?
For me, so on my mom's side, my grandma and my grandfather, I definitely grew up with them. My dad was in the army, as I probably mentioned on the podcast before. So we, traveled quite a bit, but I grew up seeing them quite a bit. We would be back in the same city, which is Delhi, where, all my grandparents and family were often.
Oh, convenient. Oh, okay.
Convenient. So it was, we would spend time with them, stayed with them. They would come visit us as well when we were elsewhere with my dad's, postings and such. They were both, characters in their own ways, where my grandfather was, this very loving, kind of quiet, wise kind of presence versus my grandmother, his wife, was loving, but a bit of a fiery person, I would say, somebody who had a personality, and you could tell that this person had, a full life before any of this happened, where she has grandchildren and things in her life. Like, you could tell this is an entrepreneurial woman who was out there doing things and making things happen. And she still was, even as she got older. And then on my dad's side, my grandmother was definitely my grandfather on my dad's side passed away when I was, I think, a year old or so I never got to meet him, but the photos and such, expressing a lot of his love for me because I was the first child in the family and such.
Oh, yeah.
But my grandmother, she was the matriarch of the family, but in a very kind, solid, foundational kind of way. Often you think of matriarchs as people who are dominating and larger than life, but she was very, very present across the board. She lived with us till she was in her 90s, but still super sharp mind, very modern thinking, always wanted to try new stuff, could tell stories, and had a super sharp memory, great sense of humor, loved entertaining, having people over. And you could see just the lives that these people had lived and seen. So all of them were treasure troves, I would say, of like just stories and information and things. But my grandma on my dad's side, more so. And I probably think that I spent the most time with her of all my grandparents. And
cool.
Sadly, none of them are with us anymore. But their memory lives on. They're very present in my mind and in all of our minds, because these weren't people that we just, went and saw for the holidays. They were very much part of our lives in a big way.
For me, on my dad's side, similar, it sounds like, to you, his father, so my grandfather, had passed away when I was also really young. So I met him, but I don't remember because I was a baby. So it is only through, pictures and audio and video that I can, and through my dad's telling of stories and things that I feel like I have grown to know him over the years. His mother suffered a stroke similarly around that time. So she was in a nursing home for all as I can remember. It was kind of hard for her to speak as well, because that was, the injury from the stroke. But, we'd see her. She lived in Chicago. She'd come to Boston sometimes. And, in the times as a child, I would go out to Chicago because that's also where my dad's brother lives, to visit family there. We would go visit her in the nursing home. So that, again, even though, I'd seen her and saw her, a lot as a child, I didn't really get to have like deep conversations or anything with her because of her injury. So it was, again, more about hearing about what she was like from my father. And then on my mom's side, her parents been divorced since before I was born. So one of my grandfather lived in West Virginia and my grandmother lived in Washington, D.C. I definitely saw my grandmother a lot more for family gatherings. We would do vacations and things like that, and she would be there. So I definitely spent the most time with her out of any of my grandparents. Really got to know her pretty well. And she really loved reading. She would always be buying me books and things to read. She encouraged my interest in and enjoyment in reading. My grandfather I would see every couple years when we would go to the holidays, like at Christmas time. We'd go to West Virginia because some of my mom's family was there too. So I saw him just kind of in those settings of just holidays. He loved singing, and I go over and do a lot of singing and things for
That's fun.
hymns and Christmas carols and things like that. He had a great voice, so that was a fun memory there. But it wasn't like I got a lot of like one-on-one time or anything where I would ask him a lot of questions. Again, it was mainly hearing stories about his time, in World War II and what it was like growing up and things through my mom and also my other my uncles and aunt on that side. So while all of my grandparents are passed away now, they still live on in my memories quite often.
All right. So with that, should we jump into our movies? So what's your number 3 movie that shaped your relationship with your grandparents?
So my number 3 movie is Heidi from 1937. And this is a film directed by Alan Dwan, starring Shirley Temple, Jean Hersholt, and Arthur Josephson. The IMDb plot summary: a plucky little orphan girl gets dumped abruptly into her gruff hermit grandfather's care, and then later gets retaken and delivered as a companion for an injured girl. So this movie, well, first of all, like I mentioned, Shirley Temple film, she was a giant star in the 30s and into the early 40s that I watched a lot of her movies as a very young child. They were always on rotation. This wasn't one of my favorite ones to be sure, but I think it fits in a lot with this episode. Actually, the first time we talked about a Shirley Temple movie on this podcast, because of the amount of times I'd watched these movies, it is kind of interesting why these haven't come up more. Maybe I need to think back to what shaped me as like a 5-year-old when I was watching all these films. But for this one, I think, and it is based on a folktale, or actually it's a book, Heidi. So there's been a lot of adaptations of the story over the years, and I've seen many different versions, and I've never actually read I think it's based on an actual book, which I've never read as a kid, but I'd seen a lot of these adaptations, and is a story that I've always enjoyed as a child, but this was the definitive version, at least for me, because I think it's the one I definitely saw the most. And for this one, the reason why I brought this into the podcast is it is an interesting sort of look at the relationship between a grandchild and a grandparent. When you're a young child and you get kind of meet your grandparent, at least for me, it didn't really feel like family necessarily. Oh, this is just this old person. Like, honestly, your grandparents are some of the first old people you really know. And you sort of, as a very, very young child, again, I'm talking like when I was like 4, 5, 6, this is sort of where a lot of my experiences in this podcast will come from, because those are my very early impressions of grandparents. It is just about hey, there's this old person. You don't really know them very well. In the same way in this film, Heidi just kind of gets dropped off at her grandfather's house. She's never met him before. He's very estranged. So she doesn't even have any context to who this person is, no stories from her parents who are passed away. So she has no context other than, oh, this person is supposed to love me. And in the beginning of the film, like, he definitely is very standoffish. He expresses love, but in his own way to her that is definitely not a way that a parent would express love to a child. I mean, there's a scene in the beginning of the movie where they're sitting down at like a dinner table, and he just gives her, hey, sit down, like, I made you some food. So okay, he's making her food. That's showing affection. But he doesn't give her like a high chair, and this chair is like completely like she can't even reach the table when she sits in it. And he just doesn't seem to care or do anything about that. It's like, oh, okay, well, you can't reach the table, you're just a kid. But then Heidi and her plucky, like, Shirley Templeness, she goes off and like solves her own problem, and then is up at the high chair, which are things that you would think a parent might immediately think, oh, I got to make sure everything's right for my child. But a grandparent, that's not necessarily the first reaction that they have. They're just, hey, look, like, I'm giving you the food, like, that should be enough of a way to kind of show your affection and love for that person. And also, your grandparents' life is so outside of your own, or at least for me, like, I wasn't around these people very often, and my grandparents, so they felt like this other life that had no connection to my own, which is a lot like, again, Heidi in this film just is now in the mountain town, and she's not from this village. She knows nothing about the culture or anything else. And she does feel a little bit like out of place. But then as the movie progresses and the story goes along, they do fall for one another sounds kind of weird, but their relationship
Mhm.
changes to the point where he genuinely does love and care for Heidi and show it in the ways that Heidi wants as well. And at the end of the film, when she gets taken away, he spends most of the third act just trying to find her, hunt her down sounds too harsh, but find where she is to get her back, because he does genuinely love and care for the child, and is part of, he accepts her into his family. And much like she does too, she misses her grandfather, even though in the beginning she's very like unsure of who this person is and why she's really there. Even there's a scene where he's kind of getting a knife out to cut some bread, and she's worried, like, oh my God, is he going to stab me? Like, there's that much distrust in the beginning, but in the end, they both end up realizing how important they are and what that love is and how important that is between a grandchild and a grandparent. So I think a lot of these feelings were how I kind of felt in the very beginning, when I was super young, in terms of my relationship with my grandparents. Had you seen this film before?
No, I'd not seen the movie. Familiar with the story and Heidi as a book, although
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'd read the book. But yeah, very sweet film, and she's so great. It's unbelievable that such a little child just has so much charisma
Oh
and
yeah.
is able to carry this movie pretty much on her own shoulders. Like, you can't take your eyes off her. And this movie is, obviously from decades ago, but it holds up because of her. You could kind of reduce the story to it being corny and cheesy and such, but she kind of cuts through it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, their relationship is amazing. And I thought this movie actually could have been a lot more cheesier, but I like that they don't spell out per se as to how their relationship is growing. They just
Right.
like
Right.
little signs and nods that, to kind of build on the chair story. Next, we see the grandfather has built a chair for her,
Right.
or they're singing, or they have these routines where they take the sleigh and go in the snow and do stuff together. So they just start to build their relationship, which is very much how I think it would happen in real life, because
Mm-hmm.
the grandfather, the fact that he's estranged and kind of portrayed as somebody who's kind of maybe even lost his way and is maybe
Mm-hmm.
senile or lives alone and such, that's more of a projection of society, the
Correct.
town
Right.
that they live in. And but the truth is that this person was wronged by the town, maybe even wronged by his own son, who
Right.
went and got married, and but I think he seeks love. He wants that.
He does.
All of this is an exterior coping mechanism to kind of deal with the fallout that he's had. But once again, we don't, this movie can be so much more melodramatic. We don't see him like sitting around pining or, being crotchety just for no reason. He just is going about his day.
Right.
And there's this beautiful, cute little disruption that comes into his life and everything changes. So yeah, I thought this movie was very effective and sweet and emblematic of grandparents and grandchildren relationships, I think, where sometimes it takes a little bit for the two to kind of come
Exactly.
together.
Right.
But
Right.
there is this inherent, almost undefinable, if that's a word, love between grandparents and grandchildren,
Mm-hmm.
even more so than perhaps parents and children, because I think it can be hard for parents to care for their children, figure all that stuff out, the mechanics of it. They're also responsible for bringing a child up, which is so complicated. It's so much more versus, I think, when you've done that for your own kid and now you have, at least this is my perspective, now you have grandchildren, you kind of have this inherent sense of love for them through your own children because you've
Right.
seen them through all of it, right? And in some ways, also a way for you to connect to a little one that you probably couldn't connect to when your own children were of that age, right? So I think there's a lot of inherent love and affection that comes in, and I love that this movie takes time to sort of tease that out, but not in a very melodramatic, pronounced kind of way.
Right, right. It's like I think this movie does highlight, and also I felt this way too, just the difference between a relationship with a parent and the love between parent and child versus grandparent. Because with a parent, a lot of it is, at least with the child, like from a transactional level, like, yeah, you're taking care of me, like you're keeping me
Yeah, you're
alive, you're
a
giving me all the things
dependent.
that I need. So it's very obvious, like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is what love is between a parent and a child. And a grandparent is not or at least, sometimes grandparents do raise children. But at least in my situation, they didn't. So it's like, okay, well, what is this love then? But you do feel there's something there in the same way that in this film, Heidi and her grandfather do figure out how to express that love and show it and feel it. And that is something that does take time with a grandparent because you're not around them a lot. They're not providing you with life in the same way that your parents kind of have to keep you alive if your grandparent is not your caregiver. And I like how this movie kind of shows that there is this inherent love between a grandparent and grandchild, just simply for the fact that you're related to this person. And you do feel that love that is just a different form of it. And I think this movie unravels to over time, which again, that relationship can take time. You start out as like, who is this person? Like, why am I like most of Heidi's like, okay, why am I here? Like, I don't know who you are either. And the same way that he doesn't really know who you are. She's just some girl who's dumped on his doorstep. But they develop that relationship over time to the point where he again is like having to seek her out and find her when she gets essentially kidnapped in the end of the second act of the movie to go and be this best friend for an invalid rich person. Yeah, a companion basically, which is an odd thing. But I think it just does a very good job, like you said, to have not over dramatizing that, but it's all sort of there. I mean, I think a lot of it too is like they want to focus a lot on just Heidi just because it's Shirley Temple and, she has a song and dance routine like she always does. And, she is such a magnetic screen personality that they don't want to afford the grandfather too much screen time because it's mainly about Shirley Temple. And that forces him, who does a great job in this film, by the way, the actor, Arthur Josephson, forces him to do things more subtly and not be so obvious because he's not going to get the screen time. And it's also hard sharing the screen with Shirley Temple, who just sort of exerts a lot of that attention and energy. Actually, is this the first Shirley Temple film you've seen, or have you seen other of her films?
I'm pretty sure I've seen other movies of hers. I can't remember now. I was trying to think about that when I watched this movie, and I was like, have I? I'm sure I have, but clearly I need to go and watch more of her stuff because she's just amazing. I've seen obviously clips and such of her, a lot, but yeah, I need to watch more of her. For sure.
Her personality is very unique and just sort of like precocious. She's sort of a brat, but she's lovable, and she is such
very sweet,
sweet at the same time.
Yeah, and grown up too, but still childlike. Like when she shows up, she's like, "Oh, there's no bed for me. Fine, I'll just make this little hay thing, and I'll be okay." And it's just very sweet. And very few people can pull that off, I think, because this can get saccharine or unbelievable or annoying or all of it. But she just has a unique way to make all of it feel real and also screen worthy.
Yes, no, for sure. I mean, that's a very unique, probably one of the best child actors who has ever graced the screens easily is her. And again, this is not my favorite movie of hers or the one that I think is the best version of her sort of on-screen persona, but it definitely, she carries this film.
Yeah. And I also love kind of the mountain town and where they're at. The setting is very beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's black and white, and it's probably shot in Burbank, but
right.
But just the setting of being in a mountain town and a lodge, and it's like a good holiday movie in that sense as well. In fact, there is a holiday thing happening during the movie. So
there is, which is another
holiday movie.
Right, which is another reason why I too associate this a lot with my relationship, especially with my grandfather, because I only really saw him around the holidays, especially around Christmas, which this movie takes place. And there's a lot of great, singing moments in this film too, and that's a lot of the memories I associate with him, just going over and singing these carols and these Christmas hymns and things like that. And that Heidi does that with her grandfather in this movie, and there's some religious themes in this film too, which I definitely did not pick up on as a kid, but man, there's a lot of it definitely has a very strong moral point of view, which was interesting. Like, marriage is good, family's important, you got to go to church, children should know their place, you know, a lot of focus on the Christian value of forgiveness, like things like that was not apparent to me as a kid, but watching it's like, whoa, like this is definitely has a very strong message that it's trying to get across. Okay, so why don't we hop over to your grandparents? What is your number 3 movie that shaped your relationship with your grandparents?
All right. So my number 3 is The Proposal from 2009. Quick logline. A pushy boss forces her young assistant to marry her in order to keep her visa status in the US and avoid deportation to Canada. Directed by Anne Fletcher, starring Sandra Bullock, Ryan Reynolds, Mary Steenburgen, and Betty White. So I put this movie on my list, obviously, for Betty White. And there's something about the Betty White persona in general, but specifically through this movie that really reminds me of my grandmother on my dad's side.
Uh-huh.
And what it symbolizes to me is somebody who's obviously very loving, very adoring towards, her grandchild, but just people around them in general, but is also kind of quirky and has like a twinkle and tongue in cheek sort of thing. Because often grandparents can, at least like you were saying, right, from the point of view of a child, can be like, oh, you're just old people.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get to see that at all with my grandparents because they felt like fully formed people with quirks and personalities.
Mm.
And you see that with Betty White in this movie, that yeah, she's doing sort of what I feel like the expected grandparental behavior of that, I love my grandchild, I will do anything and for them and go over. In fact, for me, it was always over the top, right? Over and beyond what my parents did for me and my sister, my grandparents would do for us when we showed up. Like, we would eat whatever and, ice creams galore and our favorite foods and watching TV till like 2 a.m. in the morning and what have you, all this would all rules were off essentially. That's how we would have fun and play board games and
Yeah.
all sorts of things. And so she has that, Betty White, in the movie, but then she also has a bit of a mischief towards
Definitely.
her that she knows. And that's the thing, right? Like grandparents are knowing of life and humanity, but also very knowing of the family. They
Mm-hmm.
can very easily suss out that, okay, the thing that's going to break this family in this movie is the relationship between her son and the grandchild, so Ryan Reynolds and his father.
Mm-hmm.
And she knows that I need to sort of do something dramatic, which she does to kind of break that tension. So that's sort of a big thing that she does. And then also, I think grandparents have this innate quality to see other people because they've just lived a longer life. They have experience. So even when Sandra Bullock's character is, cold and standoffish, and obviously she's manipulating, the grandchild
Right.
into marriage.
Right.
But I think Betty White can see the love between them and the heart that Sandra Bullock's character has, inside the tough exterior. She sees that
Mm-hmm.
very first, and she's willing to kind of give her a shot and, welcome her with open arms. And to me, that's exactly what my grandmother would do, that she would give people the kindness and the benefit of the doubt, even if they were prickly and unlikable. And we were sort of like, oh, who's this like random relative who's shown up at our place at 3 p.m. in the afternoon? Like, get him out.
Yeah.
No, she would be taking care of them. And ultimately, we would all say, oh, actually, we learned something from this person, even though this person seemed very annoying in the beginning. So, I always remember that. Like, you got to give people their fair share and treat them with kindness because you never know, So yeah, to me, Betty White captures that, and she's just not, an old lady in the corner,
Right.
as the world might view. Like she has a lot of chutzpah and all of that to her. But yeah, curious if you'd watched this movie before.
I had not seen this.
Oh wow,
Yeah, I had not seen this. I in the podcast, if listeners have listened for a while, they know I not at all a fan of like Julia Roberts. I think I even talked at one point too about, like Ryan. I'm not like the romantic comedy stars, the leading women of the 90s never really did it for me, except for Sandra Bullock. I was a huge fan of. Something about the way that she works in these films just always have been like, oh, Sandra Bullock's fantastic, and I'm still a big fan of hers. I just had never seen this movie for some reason, and it was a high concept comedy, where in the first 10 minutes the entire plot is spelled out. You know exactly what it is going in. You watch the poster and you see, okay, well, it's like a sham marriage because of a green card issue that Sandra Bullock's running into because she's Canadian and has to marry her assistant. So that I like the premise. And, I thought it was, she carries the movie for sure. I felt Sandra Bullock did. Just great performance. Ryan Reynolds, who's an actor who I can like sometimes for sure. I just didn't think they had a lot of chemistry together. And I didn't really buy when the moment comes where they actually have to sell the fact that they're really in love and this is like a real thing to me. I'm just like, I don't really see this working. It still feels, artificial because, again, I just don't really buy them together. But getting to the Betty White piece, she has for listeners who might not be as familiar with Betty White, or especially maybe outside of the United States, I don't know how well her persona kind of travels internationally, but this movie does a very good job of capturing the personality and the presence of who Betty White represented, especially in the end of her career. Like, I actually first saw her when I was a huge fan of the Mary Tyler Moore Show as a kid and would watch that show, all the time. And she was on that playing sort of like a ditzy character in her younger career. So that's where I first knew Betty White, but definitely in the last, decades of her life, she was known as this precocious, older woman who has like a little firecracker. She's got her own personality. She's not just going to be that old lady in the corner. I think this movie does a very good job of showcasing her persona in that way, because she is this character. And I don't really think another actor at the time could have pulled something like this off, or it would have been believable. Of like, this woman would come across as annoying potentially with the wrong actor doing this performance, or just sort of like dragging the movie down. But I think that she is the perfect casting for what this movie needs in that role. And it almost feels
the
movie
like, in my mind, I think.
Yeah. It almost feels like they gave her more screen time than maybe the character on paper had. Like, maybe the script, this character wasn't as involved in the story. And then once they got Betty White, they're like, okay, well, now we want to expand what this role is, because we need her in the movie more, which is not a bad thing. But that's sort of what I felt like. They took a character who didn't really need to be this involved and made her involved because of the persona of Betty White and sort of who she represents as an older lady, which is cool that you had a grandparent who was like this, because Betty White's pretty cool. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because me and my boyfriend, we were watching The Golden Girls lately, and Betty White's in it, and there Betty White is sort of, the not so sharp, slightly ditzy, but still very adorable and kind-hearted person, which to me is kind of a shocker, because my introduction to Betty White is the Proposal version, which is like you said, the precocious, and like we've been talking. So it's been interesting to kind of go back and see her persona. But I agree on the movie. Like, when I first watched it, it was like a fun romp. I enjoyed it, but I rewatched it since, and there are definitely some really fun and funny moments, but overall the movie is okay. Yeah. Like, I think to me, if this movie, not to critique too much, had like a tighter direction, like, it definitely drags quite a bit here and there. And I think you need, for like a high concept movie, for it to kind of really move at a pace. And then Ryan Reynolds, I think we share that same opinion. Like, he's a hit or miss for me. I think he's good in the back and forth scenes before they start to fall in love.
Agreed. Yes.
Like that, because this is Ryan Reynolds' brand, right? Like, tongue-in-cheek, sort of, kind of funny, and giving the other person shit, but also taking shit. This is what he does always in some form or the other. But then when he has to get earnest and serious, that transition just doesn't quite really happen in a big way. Or if it does, it feels kind of on the nose. And so you don't really buy the love. In fact, I buy their love through Betty White's eyes, that as a grandma, I'm seeing these two together, and the fact that this slightly maturer woman would be good for my grandchild, who's sort of, been doing whatever he's been doing, in his life. So I see that point of view more clearly without Betty White even spelling that out. It's just in the performance, versus I don't see that love from Ryan Reynolds' eyes towards Sandra Bullock.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I had mentioned earlier in my thoughts that I didn't think that Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds had chemistry. They definitely don't have romantic chemistry, but I did think that His Girl Friday kind of snappy dialogue back and forth was great. I liked the first 20 minutes of the movie when he's basically just being in scenes where he's her executive assistant, and she's the boss, and that dynamic was funny, and I think they played off one another really well in terms of that. It's just when the movie progressed and needed to get more romantic in the third act, it didn't work for me, and I think it was due to him, not her.
Not her, for sure.
Sandra Bullock's awesome.
She's great. She has this kind of acidic yet earnest quality to her that helps balance these rom-coms, right? Because they can be quite corny and cheesy, but she kind of cuts through them and shows up and puts in the work. She's not like sleepwalking through these movies, but yet makes it look really effortless, which is why I agree. Like she's definitely in my pantheon of 90s sort of rom-com stars. The other thing I would say is the Alaska setting is wonderful. Like I've never been to Alaska. I've never seen a movie set in Alaska before, even though I think it's shot in Massachusetts.
I was
But
gonna say this is not
I
Alaska.
know. But
Yeah.
just calling something Alaska
Oh
and
yeah.
setting a movie over there and a different kind of life, and their house, the lodge house and such. Like it's a new thing for a movie
Mhm.
to be focused on. So I don't know. When I first watched it, I was definitely charmed by that.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because usually these movies, like romantic comedies, where they want an exotic setting, it's because the actors just want a free vacation to X
Eh,
country, which is like Adam Sandler's entire career in the last 20 years. So I'm
right.
like, why set it in Alaska if they're not going to get to go to Alaska? And maybe because I'm from Massachusetts, the place looked so much like Massachusetts. It didn't. And there was some
Um,
several scenes where I'm like, oh, that mountain is so green screened in, and it's so obvious because they're running around in this town, which is from, like the North Shore or something. And it's just
uh,
like, it does not look like Alaska. Not that I've been to Alaska, but it looks so much like Massachusetts to me. I was like, this is ridiculous. Why did they even do this? I guess to make the family more exotic, or to also give the movie a larger scope instead of, oh, they're going to like, a small town in Mass or New Hampshire or something. That I just was so odd. The other thing I'll just point out too that I thought was so bizarre was that entire, I think you know what I'm going to say, that
right.
Indian dance scene was the
Oh
weirdest
yeah.
thing I've ever seen in a movie. It wasn't funny
Yeah.
like at all, and it was like, what is going on here? So there's a scene where Betty White's character is supposed to be part Native American for some reason. I guess they did that so they could do this scene and have it not
I
be
guess.
racist or something. But she does this like Indian love dance, and then Sandra Bullock kind of comes into it, like none of this is working, and it was bizarre to see these two great on-screen comedians be like anti-funny in an entire sequence. It's like 6 minutes long. I'm like, what is this? Like, whose idea was this? Who thought this worked? But clearly
Very
someone did,
odd.
because I remember this is in the trailers. They showed moments of this. This must have tested well in test screen audiences.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
we got to extend the Indian dance sequence because people love seeing Betty White like jumping around a fire talking about what that was the most bizarre thing I've seen in a
Very
mainstream movie in a
bizarre.
long time.
It's
It's
just
so weird.
so broad and just weird. And
So weird.
but I can see, sort of people kind of losing their shit in the theater, just like
Yeah.
laughing like crazy. And I've always been like, what's happening?
It's like, this
Uh,
is weird.
they could have done anything else because
Yeah,
to me, it's a pretty pivotal moment for Ryan Reynolds to sort of see Sandra Bullock like let loose, and for
exactly.
Sandra Bullock to also feel comfortable enough to, you know, give herself a little bit of an out, and
Hmm.
also bond with Betty White. And I think it's a lot to say. It says a lot about like what Betty White has done to make Sandra Bullock feel more comfortable and open up and things like that. So
Hmm.
it's a pretty important moment. I think things shift
Yes,
totally
yes,
after
yes.
this. They could have done anything else. It
Right.
didn't have to be this at
No,
all.
yeah, it just did not. And I mean, I
No.
hate to again blame Ryan, not Ryan Reynolds, sorry, Betty White and Sandra Bullock, two people that I think are great and actually work well in this film. But I just like they can't pull this off in a way that, I don't know, like they couldn't find the humor in this in the right way. It was just super bizarre. Though you're right, it's necessary in the script for this moment to happen.
Yeah.
And I saw the mechanics of what they were trying to do in the terms of in the narrative. And you do need this moment, but like why pick this? And not only with the oddly racist sort of undertones of like, why is a white woman like pretending to be a Native American? Like, just make it be anything else. Like, could she have like a German
Right.
heritage? She's in Lederhosen or something. Like, it was just it was very weird. Yeah, maybe you want to go to Massachusetts for sure. Go back and vacation there. But, yeah, Sandra Bullock's great. I just want to make sure that is people know my thoughts on her. She's fantastic.
All right. So, what is your number two movie, Alex, that shaped your relationship with your grandparents?
So my number two movie is Cocoon from 1985. This is a film directed by Ron Howard, starring Don Amici, Wilford Brimley, and Hume Cornyn. The IMDb plot summary: when a group of trespassing seniors swim in a pool containing alien cocoons, they find themselves energized with youthful vigor. So this movie is like the plot summary described: a bunch of old people in a nursing home in Florida being old into their life. And then because of this alien energy, all of a sudden, then they feel invigorated and youthful and, you know, going out and doing things again. And for me, this really symbolizes my early relationships with my grandparents, because for me, these are old people to me. Like, these are the first old people that I knew. I never thought of them as having any kind of, youthful energy or being young. Like, you don't really think about it, or at least I didn't. My grandparents as young people, which obviously they lived these full lives before you even meet them when they're in their 60s and 70s, like when you're a kid. But you just think about they're always old. And what this movie does is give, because through these old people that get invigorated by this alien cocoon, they start then acting young. And it really does remind you that, yeah, these are people that did live very full lives, had a lot of energy at one point, and are, full human beings, and not just, some old people that you see every, couple times a year. And you don't really think about, again, the context of what their lives were like, because I never had curiosity as a young child to ask them about these things, because, hey, they're just old people. I wanted to talk more to my cousins and, my uncles and aunts, because they were younger, obviously, than the grandparents. And then the other thing in this movie, I think, too, that struck me as well is just so there's a scene where Wilford Brimley is just talking to his grandson, because there's a grandson in the film, too. At the end of the film, the old folks who get energized by this youthful energy don't want to lose it. And they decide to go back to the alien planet to, I guess, sort of, the promise is to stay forever young. Not that they're being de-aged, but to have that youthful energy. And so there's a scene basically where Walter Brimley's talking to his grandson, explaining he's going to leave, he's going to be gone, he's not coming back. Like, this is what they've decided to do. And that is, in a way, like an allegory for death. And for me, like, grandparents are the first people typically that are in your family that pass away at some point. You sort of know, I did even as a young child, okay, well, these are older people. I know at some point they're going to pass away, and I'm going to have to, be at their funerals or sort of deal with that. You don't really think about that with your parents or your aunts and uncles in the same way, your siblings. I mean, all these things, obviously, at any time, anyone could go for various number of reasons. But for me, at least, the grandparents are the first people you thought about as a child. Okay, well, at some point they're going to die. And I think that scene where the grandson has to sort of understand that and realize, yeah, like, his grandfather is leaving, not to die or to go to some afterlife, but to go to an alien planet, to a better place, and make a decision that he kind of wants to do. It sort of does tap into a lot of my thoughts as a young child of just like realizing, oh yeah, they're at some point they're not going to be here anymore, and that's just what happens to all of us. At some point, your life will end. So I think those two messages for me really resonated with a lot of what, as a young child, I would think about with my grandparents. So throw it to you now. Like, have you seen this film before? What are your thoughts, and how did it, how these themes or any other themes that you found in this movie that resonate with you?
Yeah, I'd never seen this movie before. I'd heard of it. In fact, I kept confusing this movie in my head with Contact, who also has like a powerful
That's right.
older character. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, this is not that. This is the other one. But I was very happy I was very happy to watch this movie. And I've said in the podcast before, I'm not a big Ron Howard person, but I think this is like a very good Ron Howard movie for a change. So I was, pleasantly surprised by that. But the themes of the movie, like you mentioned, are very poignant and moving, because these people might be older at the end of their lives, but they've had rich lives, and wouldn't it be fun for them, but also for other people, to see them go back and relive that life with more vitality and energy? Because the fact is, it's kind of best of all worlds, right? That you're mature, you're more stable, you've achieved what you wanted to achieve in your life, but you're obviously aging and ailing. So if those parts were taken away, to me, this feels like the perfect balance, actually. Because I was thinking about this after watching the movie, that would I actually want to be de-aged, or would I just want to be older and not feel, achy and sick and ailing and such? And I think I would probably choose the latter, because there's something about the balance of maturity and experience coupled with the vitality and energy of life. So it's kind of interesting to kind of just think about that and watch these guys go through that. And then I guess the other thing to call it is that they're pretty well-defined characters. Like, you see all of these guys react to this new found lease of life in a very different way, which I think is quite fun to see, and how they kind of interact with each other, and how in some ways they kind of become just like, boys will be boys, and just a couple of, teenagers or even preteens hanging out in the beginning of the movie, and how kind of that progresses and what that does to their relationships in real life. Yeah, I had a lot of fun watching this movie, and then some great performances as well throughout. Like this movie can be, again, a high concept movie that can be cheesy and corny, but if it's not grounded by the right performances, it just wouldn't work. And this one surely is.
Yeah, I think the performances definitely make this movie more interesting. I mean, I think rewatching it now, especially, there's a whole plot thread with Steve Gutenberg, who's working with the aliens to find their pods and
Yeah,
things,
that
and that
stuff is
doesn't
just
work at
whatever.
all. And
It's
it's sort
funny,
of
like
like,
the young people do not work in this movie.
no, they don't. It kind of drags the movie down. Even Joe
Yeah.
Don Baker, who plays one of the aliens, is one of my favorite like B movie actors. Like he doesn't really, because he's trying to play like a stiff sort of alien. He's not even as fun as he normally
No.
is. But it's really the performances, especially Don Amici and Wilford Brimley, that
Yeah.
make this movie fun and energetic. I mean, there's a whole scene when after they're invigorated, they kind of go out on the town and they're going breakdancing, literally. I mean, obviously it's a stunt double, but like breakdancing, going to clubs, having fun, driving around at night, like all these things that they must have done as a youth. And I'm sure as old people still desire to do those things, but maybe feel like, oh, they can't, or it's not their place. And, but those scenes are really fun. And it's also kind of crazy that Wilford Brimley was like 50 when this was being
Oh.
they had to like put him in old man makeup to make him seem older to fit in more of the other older actors. But yeah, I mean, overall, I don't think the movie's like amazing or anything.
No.
But the message is there, especially around just, what is, youth wasted on the young is sort of what they say. And I actually think it's interesting. They're using this opportunity to, these old people, like change things about themselves that maybe they kind of gave up on, like to find the love that they really wanted, or to, to do things that maybe they, to kind of fix over some of the regrets that I'm sure people have some of those when they get to that age. So it's not just like, oh, they were always perfect and now all of a sudden they're young again. It's like, no, they're using this opportunity to kind of better themselves, which is something that hopefully, all people have at the end of their lives, and not just a resignment to, just old age. You might not be rejuvenated by alien pods, but, you still can change your life as some of the, one of the couples gets married in this movie, even though they're super old. And, hey, that still can happen no matter how old you are. And then I also think it's an interesting choice at the end of the film too, to have them all decide, or not all of them, but the majority of these folks decide to leave and go back to the planet, which again, I sort of see as some sort of allegory for just death in a way. Of like, hey, look, yeah, we've had a great time on Earth. We love our family and things like that. It's just time to go move on and choose to go to an afterlife or something. I mean, maybe it could be an allegory for like heaven or something too, like this perfect paradise that they're going off to. They don't really know what it is, but they are excited to go, which I thought that that part worked really well for me. Like
it
that
worked really well.
allegory.
It's very moving, for the little kid, the grandson, and all, to kind of that dialogue that you're mentioning that happens between the grandfather and the child, that I'm leaving, and that's very moving. And then it's also very moving to see one of the other guys whose wife passes away, and he decides not to leave,
right?
And he just wants to be with the memories of his life with his wife, and everything, and it's all very moving and sweet, I think.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think the heart of this movie is those, the old people, not just the gimmicks of seeing them do all they're climbing trees again and they're having, that's fun from like a perspective of a set piece, but there are a lot of mature decisions the characters make in this film, and that again make them feel like fully well-rounded characters who've lived a full life but still have wants and desires, and that I think is something that a lot of times old people in movies are just like used for comedic effect, or like, oh, here's just an old person, or they're not given so much of of choices for things. As when you're old, you don't have a lot of options. You're nearing the end of your life, and I think this movie is interesting that it plays with these sci-fi elements to give a lot of interesting decisions to the older members of the film, the older cast parts of the film. Again, the Steve Gutenberg stuff does not work really at all for me. No. It's just boring, and as that eats up more of the screen time in the third act, the movie does kind of drag a bit, I feel like, in the third act of the film, because it just becomes this quest for Steve Gutenberg to help Joe Don Baker find more of these pods and then escape the Coast Guard. And it just, that none of that stuff.
No one cares about that stuff.
Yeah, it's like dime store Spielberg kind of like, oh, I know you're trying to make some ET, some big action set piece, but what really actually works here are the character moments. The other stuff just doesn't to me. And I think this film even won an Oscar for like best special effects, which I don't even think the effects are really that good. They don't
really hold up.
They don't. Yeah. It's like okay, it's an alien ship that looks the same as every alien ship. There's nothing interesting and new with the designs that I
No.
think, again, I think it won an Oscar, or at least was nominated. Just I don't
I
think
think
was
it was
more to that.
nominated. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I when I watched started the movie, I immediately was like, oh, I need to go and check it. Was this after or before ET? Because it has such
it
a,
does.
ET vibe that,
It
oh, this
does.
is in now. So let's sort of try and recreate that. So instead, I wish they'd given some of the older women more to do. Like Jessica Tandy's in this movie, a brilliant actress, Oscar winner. Like
Uh-huh.
it took me a bit to know, oh my gosh, that's Jessica Tandy. She's just like not even a side character, like a side character. So
Yeah,
it would have been fun to maybe throw in one of the ladies in this mix who sneaks in with the guys and wants to jump in the pool with the pods or something. I think that could have been more interesting because you don't really get the female perspective whatsoever in terms of wanting
that's
youth
true.
and wanting to stay for longer, what have you. Maybe that's a different movie altogether, which I would love to see, cast your Jane Fondas or what have you of the world
Mm.
to make something like that. I would love to see it.
If they remake this film, which I think they could actually, to your
Mm-hmm.
point, and vastly improve it. I mean, that's why I'm very pro remake. If the first film, just has the right elements, but the execution wasn't great, I think this film is a great candidate for a remake or like a mini series version of it or something, because
Yeah,
there is a lot
miniseries could
of
be fun too.
interesting things you can do with the theme of not de-aging or going back in time, which are things, many of the movies deal with that. This is still you. You've lived your full life. You're not getting, your body's not getting younger. Your spirit though is coming back, that youth
Mm-hmm.
and spirit energy. So could be something
Yeah.
there.
Now,
Okay, so what is your number two film?
so my number two movie that shaped my relationship with my grandparents that is Terms of Endearment from 1983, directed by James L. Brooks, starring Shirley MacLaine, Deborah Winger, Jack Nicholson, and quick logline. Follows hard to please Aurora looking for love and her daughter's family problems. Ooh, terrible logline. That's it. It's not even a full sentence.
No, that's bad. Yeah, that's not good. That's like a post, not even a line on a poster. That's not
Yeah,
good.
it's nothing. So I think I teased this a little bit in the beginning of the episode that to me this movie and specifically Shirley MacLaine in this movie, who does end up becoming a grandmother pretty early on in the movie, kind of represents that person who is a grandparent but is like a fully formed being
Mm-hmm.
who is vital, is adoring and loving, but is also complicated and complex and has a lot going for them, is a sexual being, is sometimes annoying, sometimes loving, but at the end of the day, it's the person who you come back to, because they are the center of power in your life, if you will, for good or maybe also not for good. And
Mm-hmm.
but they're omnipresent in your life no matter what. And from a child's perspective, or I should say even a grandchild's perspective, you look at this person and you can see that, yeah, this is not just my adoring grandmother whose lap I'm going to hop into and sort of rock on the chair. I might do
Mm-hmm.
that, but I'm going to learn a lot. And this person is going to, you know, hold me accountable and give me shit when I'm making terrible choices as a grandchild. And I experienced a lot of that from, all my grandparents. But like I said, to me, my mom's mom probably bears the most resemblance with Shirley MacLaine's character in
Uh-huh.
this movie, who I can never forget moments in my lives where, we would be somewhere in there's like a country county fair of sorts happening, and it's like packed and there are millions of people, and my parents are there, my sister is there, and my grandmother is there, and we all trying to find a way to get in and find a spot. You suddenly look, my grandma has disappeared, and
Huh.
then 10 minutes later she's waving because she's finagled her way to the very best seats, got us all seats.
Wow.
And she's looks like $1 million, she all dressed up, and she's out there and she's done this, and then we are all like following, hobbling along, separating the crowds to kind of get to this place. This is who
That's
she was.
hilarious.
And that came with a lot, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, it wasn't always easy. And now that I'm older, I almost think about her and also Shirley MacLaine's character in this movie, is that these were women who probably had a lot more to offer in life. If they were born in a different time or had different circumstances, they probably would have been, I don't know, business women or what have you. I think they just had a lot more to offer, and their ambition never got fully met. And but you see some of that rubbing off in their home lives and such. So, but yeah, anyway, before I keep going, had you watched this movie before?
I had not seen this movie. I was a movie I'd wanted to see just because it was a Best Picture winner. And this was interesting because I didn't really have much of a expectation going into what this movie kind of was. I mean, the only thing I knew about it was the scene on the beach with Jack Nicholson driving the car. That's shown a lot in movie montages and things. So that was the only thing I kind of associated with this movie. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't really like it much at all. I didn't think it really worked for me. And I guess I don't understand why it has so much acclaim, because it still does even now. This movie that is supposed to be like the saddest movie, or like you're supposed to care about all the people. I don't know. It didn't really work for me. I will say that Shirley MacLaine did a very good job. I liked her performance, and I love Deborah Winger as an actor, but I just didn't think her character, I don't know, I just didn't really connect with her struggles, I guess. And then Jack Nicholson was very odd to me. Like I was sort of actually thinking a lot about his career after seeing him in this movie and how much I didn't really like him in it, and realizing that maybe when he transitions into an icon where he's basically playing the movie star persona of Jack Nicholson, I just don't like that in his performances. Like he entered this era in the 80s where he basically just playing the Jack Nicholson movie star in most films. He's not really stretching himself as much as he did in the 60s and 70s. I mean, some of his performances then are some of the, greatest that I've seen on screen. And then I think he just kind of gets lazy and just plays Jack and things. And I'm like, I don't know if I really like when he plays Jack, because I don't know. He didn't work for me in this movie. But I can see what you say about the themes around especially the Shirley MacLaine character feeling like, I don't want to say she deserved more, because I don't think people deserve or don't deserve anything really in life. Life is just what life is. But the opportunities that I think she should have had were not presented to her because of the time that she grew up. And she clearly has a very strong will, has a lot of energy, has a specific look at life that I think could have been put to use. And she sort of, I felt that in her life, she was not given a fair shake at every sort of step of the way. And in a way was sort of like maybe taking it out on her daughter a bit too, which is what the interesting thing about the mother-daughter dynamic in this movie was definitely very, interesting. It's like, I understand it, but I don't understand it in terms of like why this works and how they're actually helping one another. And maybe at the end of the movie, I still didn't. But maybe it's just like because I wasn't very interested in any of the characters, because the movie wasn't really grabbing me, that I didn't feel invested enough to really understand what that was. Yeah, surprised that it still has so much acclaim, personally. I mean, I'm also not a huge James L. Brooks fan. He's fine, but he's not amazing. I think Broadcast News, which we talked about recently, is the best thing that I've seen him done. And I think that movie does really work. It is a classic, but this one, I don't know, just didn't really hit me.
Yeah. This movie kind of grabbed me the first time I saw it, mainly because of Shirley MacLaine and what a powerhouse she is and what a knockout
Great
performance it is.
Yeah.
But I think it took me several watches, especially this time, to kind of fully understand what is happening in this movie from like a filmmaking standpoint and all these different characters. And I love this movie now. I mean, I always liked it, but now I sort of love it because it's very complex, I think, in terms of what it's saying about these relationships. Like, I think what you just said is the point. I think this mother-daughter relationship, it just can't be pinned down. They're codependent, they support each other, but they're also toxic for each other in a way that, if they were not calling each other all the time and holding each other accountable all the time, probably the daughter would have made different choices and, found a different man or stood up for herself more. But because she knows that my mom is always there to sort of fight the fight for me, she kind of becomes passive in her own life. But at the same time, she does have a little bit of a mother in her too. So she's not just a doormat either. So that's the thing with James L. Brooks. Like, the writing is just so true to life that sometimes you can almost miss it because it's not being spelled out. The way this movie moves from like years and decades forward, there are no cards, there's no timelines that are shown to you. Oh, this is happening or that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of how life is, it just sort of goes from one thing to the other. And which is why I think it takes a few watches for this movie to kind of really wash over you and for you to see. So yeah, their relationship is amazing. I think Deborah Winger is amazing in the movie because she's, like I said, she has her mother in her, but she
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have the agency, and she plays that conflicted person so well. And then I will push back on the Jack Nicholson part too.
Really?
I think he's incredible in this movie. I mean, sure, it may have started a whole string of him playing similar roles, and not all of those are successful, but I think this one really is. And I think it's quite daring for like a top bill movie star heartthrob person to be standing with his paunch out, you know uh and but at the same time using that to portray like sexuality of between older people. And we see that about men, but I think more so between him and Shirley MacLaine. You don't really see that very often, and you see a lot of layers. Like, this is somebody who also I think has not gotten everything he wanted in
Mm-hmm.
a way. And this whole thing of the shrine of the astronaut in his kitchen, which is
Mm-hmm.
so hilarious to me, it's very emblematic that it's a self-made facade. The
Right.
girls that he's bringing over, they often don't stay. They kind of make fun of him, actually. It's kind of a sad existence where he's just lonely. And you start to see that shell crack a little bit because of Shirley MacLaine. But because this wall that he's built up is just so thick that he runs away. But he's back again when shit gets really tough as the movie progresses. And once again, it's not overly dramatized that, oh, he's showing up to save the day or anything like that. No, he's just there, kind of how somebody like that in real life would be, whose shell has been cracked just a little bit. They're not fully there to commit yet,
Mm-hmm.
but they still feel something that they're trying to grasp at. So yeah, I think this movie is very complex in its humanity and its relationships. It took me a few watches to fully get to it. I still think Broadcast News is the more superior movie, but this is kind of up there too, especially on
Wow.
this
Okay.
watch.
Oh.
It sort of knocked me over completely.
Oh. Yeah, I
I
wouldn't put
finally got it.
interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't put these two movies in the same sentence, but maybe it's someday I'll revisit it. It also was interesting to me because again, this movie's boiled down to that one scene of him driving his car with his feet on the beach, and that is in like 100 years of movies, and they use that all the time. And I'm like, this scene, I don't get why that was so iconic in any way. It didn't like represent the movie. I don't know. That also was I guess I was disappointed in that because I expected that to be some major movie moment, like E.T. going across the moon, or like, Tim Robbins in Shawshank. And like there's sort of moments and scenes that are used in all these montages. And this one I was waiting for, like, oh yeah, I finally get to see the driving on the beach thing in context and understand what that is. And I just was like, I don't know. It
I'll
just
tell you
didn't
why.
work. Why yeah, can you explain it? I'm actually curious.
It's a time thing, right? Like, just imagine 5 years from now, Leo is in a movie, much older,
Mm-hmm.
with an older woman who's, of his age. So let's just say like 50s, or let's just say even 10 years from now. And we've grown up with Leo, seen him be this heartthrob person, and there he is, this older guy, but you get to still see the same heartthrob kind of persona of him being done in this kind of a way.
Mm.
Your jaw will be on the floor. And you can't even compare the two because Jack Nicholson is just so larger than life. And we didn't grow up in that time. We didn't
Right,
see
right.
him firsthand doing what he used to do. So I think it's there because of that generational
Mm.
factor. Like,
So
this
it's
is
Jack, you think? It's like a
it's
Jack kind of
Jack.
thing.
Like, you
Okay.
get to see that him in this older kind of physical appearance still being Jack. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's something pretty powerful about that. And not doing that with, a 20-year-old or 30-year-old, with Shirley MacLaine, an
Mm.
older woman. I think there's something about that feels maybe revelatory or iconic even.
Well, it clearly is iconic because it's
It clearly
used
is.
all over
Yeah.
the place. overall, I saw the terms. I just don't agree to the terms of the endearment, I guess. But maybe at some point I'll rewatch. I think to your point of like it is so true to life. It's almost like so true to life that it's boring to me, I guess. It's like it's a movie, like I need something a little bit elevated. And I also felt the twist, I got a twist, but like the third act cancer piece almost seemed so convenient to the script that it just sort of, I was like, okay, this seems like a thing, like a soap opera when they throw in like an illness or a death or a wedding just to give some more weight to the circus. I just know I didn't feel that at all or think that was, I don't know. It just seemed to come out of nowhere, not in a dramatic way, but in a planned out sort of, I don't know. Again, this movie just didn't really work for me, but maybe it's someday I'll reread the terms and see if I'm going to accept the terms of endearment next time. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it right. Like, I think it's so true to life because that's how it happens, right? When somebody falls terribly ill in your life, somebody whom you know and love, it just happens. It just comes out of nowhere. And that's sort of how this is. But I can see, like, if the movie has not grabbed you up till then that third act can then feel convenient.
Yeah.
Planned out. So
right.
I get it. Yeah. All right. So from the terms of the terms, where are you taking us now, Alex, with your number one?
So my number one film that shaped my relationship with my grandparents is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory from 1971. This is a film directed by Mel Stewart, starring Gene Wilder, Jack Albertson, and Peter Ostrom. The plot summary: a poor but hopeful boy seeks one of the 5 coveted golden tickets that will send him on a tour of Willy Wonka's mysterious chocolate factory. So this is a film I'm sure a lot of listeners are familiar with. It's based on a famous Roald Dahl book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This film, and why I have it as my number one, is to me it always represented the ideal relationship, or what I would envision as like the ideal relationship between a grandparent and a grandchild, in the relationship that Charlie, who's the main boy in the film, has with his grandfather, Grandpa Joe, and what they do for each other, how their relationship changes over the course of the film, and how they're both teaching each other lessons that are very important depending on what their stage in their life is. I mean, definitely Charlie and Grandpa Joe have a special relationship in the beginning of the film. You see them kind of talking alone at night. They have a special bond. Folks who haven't seen the film, Charlie's a poor British kid, and in his house, his dad is not around. We don't really know. I think his dad passed away. They might even say it. His mom's a working mother. Yeah. She's always out there working, and both sets of grandparents live in their house, but they're bedridden. They're just literally in a bed in the center of the house. They never get up. They never move. But Grandpa Joe seems to have energy that he's trying to always encourage Charlie's dreams. Oh, you got to be dreaming. You got to dream big. The mother even, is encouraging Charlie to get a job. And the first line I think even Grandpa Joe has in the film is, oh, that boy works too hard for his age. Like, he should be out there having fun, which is what, a grandparent who's not having the responsibility of raising the child or the responsibility of caring for the child, it's on the parents. They're able to say these things and sort of want their kid to, you to be a little, maybe break the rules, be a little more crazy, live life to the fullest, because they have that perspective. Now they're really old, and they know there's not a lot of time left for them. So they're trying to live their life to the fullest, hopefully. And that's sort of something that they can pass down to their grandchild. And then there's the back and forth in this film in the beginning too, around spending money on one another between Charlie and the grandfather. They're very poor. Charlie brings home some money from his work, but then gives his spare change to his grandfather to buy tobacco instead of using it on himself. And the grandfather uses that money and buys a chocolate bar for Charlie to hope that he wins the golden ticket, which is this competition that everyone's after. You have to buy the chocolate bar to get the ticket. Unfortunately, there isn't a ticket. And then when Charlie finds spare change on the street, he uses it to buy chocolate for himself, has a little left over, decides to spend that money on his grandfather and buy him a chocolate bar, and that's the one that has a golden ticket in it. So it's because they're showing affection by sacrificing this money and spending it on each other that actually leads to eventually Charlie going to the factory and spending time there with his grandfather too, who miraculously kind of like jumps out of bed, or at least as a child I always thought it was miraculous, because you think he's maybe not able to walk anymore because none of his grandparents are getting up, and all of a sudden he wins, Charlie wins the golden ticket and Grandpa Joe's dancing around. So Charlie's giving Grandpa Joe that gift of youthful energy too. So they're both able to trade off on one another and give them gifts, and that actually leads to more things in the film that I'll get into. But I want to sort of have you jump into the conversation a bit. And have you seen this film before? What is your thoughts on this film and then Grandpa Joe?
Yeah, I've seen it before many years ago. I remembered bits of it, of
Hmm.
course, and the amazing, amazing Gene Wilder performance. But
Yes. Yes.
it's funnily enough that the interaction with the grandpa and such, I kind of remember that more from the Johnny Depp Wonka movie in my head
Oh,
as
interesting.
compared to this one, just because I think I've seen that more times because
Hmm.
used to be on TV a lot. So, but it was very super fun to kind of visit this movie after a long, long time, and we can share our thoughts on the movie separately. But yeah, their relationship is very interesting in the sense that yes, to everything you said of the two of them learning from each other, giving each other energy and helping each other. But I also love the fact that the grandfather character is not portrayed in this perfect, pristine, adoring grandfatherly
Hmm.
kind of way. He has
Hmm.
those qualities, but he's also flawed, like all
Yes.
people are. He makes some poor choices. There's greed involved when they're in the factory, and that leads to maybe not so positive outcomes. And you see the same thing happen with Charlie as well, who actually, in many ways, Charlie is perhaps more grown up than even the grandfather
Yes.
in
Yes.
his
More
resolve,
mature. Hmm.
more mature. And that's again is sort of true to life, and like you were saying, they're all bedridden, but I think Grandpa Joe probably has been like a child at heart person from the beginning, I think.
Hmm.
And I think he just gave up on life, or there was no reason to really get out of bed, literally. And
Right.
I think
Right.
this whole thing kind of does that. I don't even know if any of, maybe all of, none of them are bedridden, perhaps.
Hmm.
There just has not been any reason to do anything more. Plus, it's like a very small apartment to begin with. And there's something about the bond they share, but there's also something about the childlike excitement that Grandpa Joe himself possesses. And I remember these moments with my grandparents that every often they were almost more excited in the toy that I got. Or they were
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
excited in the dish that we just ordered because I remember this, like they didn't grow up eating a lot of Chinese food, and I have like a vivid memory of my grandma eating noodles. I'm pretty sure that wasn't the first time, but really relishing them with like a childlike enthusiasm that, oh,
Yeah.
this is so tasty and the textures are so interesting and blah 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 blah. So once again, it's a reminder, right? Like these are not just old people, they are fully etched out people and they have desires and wants as well. So I thought that's very sweetly portrayed in this movie, but it has a little bit of an edge to it,
Hmm.
I think.
No, I think that's a really good point too, that he's not, yeah, this ideal, perfect version of a grandfather or just even a person. There's when they're in the factory, he encourages Charlie to break the rules and drink this fizzy lifting drink that eventually gets them into trouble at the end of the film. Because slowly, I'm sure most listeners have seen this film, but slowly over the course of the movie, each of the children who wins the prize, basically Willy Wonka's doing this to find the perfect person to take over his factory for him, and has that childlike wonder. And most of the people, the kids have all these flaws, whether they're selfish, they're greedy, they're gluttonous. It's, they all kind of get eliminated, and then Charlie's the last one left, and you think, oh great, he won. But then he gets in trouble for the thing that the grandpa actually encouraged him to do. Oh, let's sneak and take some of this drink and do this thing. And then he gets yelled at, and actually they're leaving. And this is definitely a moment where Grandpa Joe's not a role model here. He's saying, oh great, now that we're leaving, you have a piece of this secret candy and we can take it and give it to one of his competitors. Willy Wonka's, what a horrible guy he is. He's screwing us over. Let's get him back and do this like revenge act. And that's the moment in the film where Charlie realizes, actually, no, that's not the right thing. He's learning from his grandfather's flaws, which is something I think the best relationships, you learn from the negatives of your, whether it's your partner or your, a familiar relationship or even a grandfather. You see them doing something wrong, and then that helps you teach you what to do right. And that's the moment then where he gives back the everlasting gobstopper, which is that secret bit of candy that he had, instead of passing it over to a competitor. And that's what ends up winning. And so in a way, Charlie's success in the end of getting the chocolate factory, winning the contest, not the golden ticket, but the actual real contest, which is getting the factory, is because his grandfather acts in anger of like, oh, let's screw this Willy Wonka guy. And seeing that example, Charlie realizing that's the wrong thing to do, teaches him. And I think if the grandfather had said, oh no, we should give that back, maybe Charlie does it because he listens to an authority figure, but he's not really he doesn't have that agency. He's not making that decision himself. So it wouldn't really be a teaching moment if someone's telling you to do something the right
Mm-hmm.
thing. You have to see that in yourself. And actually, by someone telling you do the wrong thing, if that helping you learn what the right thing is, I think that shows more to Charlie's character. So again, even though the grandfather is flawed, he's teaching Charlie to be a better boy and a better person, and ends up winning the contest at the end. So I think that having him be flawed and not perfect, I think, is an important part of the story, which again, I give credit to Roald Dahl for. That's the book that
Oh, yeah.
this is based on.
It's incredible. And this the movie is just absolutely amazing. And Gene Wilder performance, the special effects, the music, it sort of has this sweet but haunting and unnerving sort of quality to it. It's from a child's point of view, but it's also not. Like this movie is so complex in its rendering, I think.
I agree. And it's funny you mentioned that you'd seen the Tim Burton version with Johnny Depp more often because it played on TV a lot. I mean, that's the reason why I saw this movie, because it would run
Mm-hmm.
all the time on cable when I was a kid. And I don't think
Mm,
we didn't own the copy. I don't think I ever like rented it from the video store or the library. Maybe I did once or twice because it was on TV so often that I was just able to, see it several times a year. And it really is for my generation, or our generation, I think, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but it sort of seems like our version of like Wizard of Oz in a way of like, this is just a
yeah,
family classic that's on TV all the time that sort of gives you that same feeling that Wizard of Oz might have given our parents'
totally.
generation. I love Wizard of Oz too, and that was also on a lot on cable as well. But this movie is I think inheriting that sort of
Totally. It's a
instant
great
classic
comparison.
kind of thing. Well, I guess I should correct myself. It wasn't an instant classic. This movie actually was a flop when it came out. Didn't do
Mm,
well, was not well reviewed. And it wasn't until the 80s when it was just consistently on cable TV that sort of became at first a cult classic. And now I think it is a classic. And I love when that can happen too, when the movies are
yeah,
good, but they're just not, there's something about it in the way that when it was released at the time, or maybe the audience wasn't ready for it, it wasn't finding its audience, but the content is so great because this movie is, like you said, Gene Wilder's fantastic. The music, which to me is very important in a musical, are great.
hmm.
Like some of these songs are, the
Oh,
Oompa Loompa
iconic.
song, the Candyman song. I mean, these are songs that you're immediately humming after you finish the
Yeah,
movie. And
pure
it just all,
imagination,
yeah,
like
per
the
imagination. Oh, so
eeriness.
great.
That's just amazing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a fantastic film, and I love how cable TV can do that, and it's in a way sort of sad that I don't think with the landscape we have now of just streaming services and there being 1,000 movies at your fingertips all the time, there isn't this opportunity for something that might have not been well seen 20 years ago, just being out there by osmosis. It becomes a classic because it's always on TNT or USA or all these channels that used to run all these movies, especially around the holiday time when you're sitting in front of the TV as a kid. I just wonder if we're losing something there, that there's all these hidden gems that'll never become
Yeah.
classics anymore because of streaming. I don't know. That's a different
That's a
conversation. I
great
mean,
point.
to take it a little bit off topic, but this
Yeah.
movie
Yeah.
made me
That's a
think
great
of that
point.
when I saw it.
Yeah, you're totally right. There's something about just a casual repeat viewing that makes you see something in a different light. There's so many movies that I've seen that. But yeah,
Mhm.
this was so fun to watch again. And I think now this one will probably be in my rotation. It hasn't been so
Mm.
far, but now it will be.
It's a fun, especially around the holiday time.
Yeah.
And we mentioned, the grandparents and this being a kind of a holiday themed episode.
Yeah.
But this was a movie that was always on Thanksgiving and Christmas time on
Mm,
TV, and I definitely
mm,
associate it with the holidays too, which again is
mm.
what I associate my grandparents with, because that's mainly when I'd see them.
Yeah.
So speaking of holidays, actually, why don't we move on to your number one unintended segue here?
Right. I mean, it doesn't get more holiday than this. My number one movie that shaped my relationship with my grandparents is Miracle on 34th Street from 1947, directed by George Seaton, starring Edmund Gwenn, Maureen O'Hara, John Payne, and a very little Natalie Wood. Quick logline: after a divorced New York mother hires a nice old man to play Santa Claus at Macy's, she is startled by his charm to be the genuine article. When his sanity is questioned, a lawyer defends him in court by arguing that he is not mistaken. So it's sort of weird to say that I sort of see, my mom's dad, my grandfather
Uh-huh.
in Santa as played at least in this movie.
Yeah.
It's not so much the Santa-ness of it, but more about what Santa, and I should say Edmund Gwynn, stands for in this
Hmm.
movie, which is just doing the right thing, giving people a chance, being kind and adoring towards everybody, but also being firm
Hmm.
and also being quirky, in his own right. Like when I never forget through the course of the movie, there's a psychologist, a quack psychologist, really, at
Right.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
company
Yeah.
who the authorities of the company sort of put in charge to talk to Edmund Gwynn's character and see if he's sane or no. And when he's getting on his nerves, Edmund Gwynn basically like, kind of lightly punches him with his umbrella,
Yeah.
which is such a amazing moment. And I think it's critical, obviously, to the plot of the movie, but it's, I think, also critical to the character, that this is not your, once again, your flawless, pristine, grandfatherly character who's just
Hmm.
cuddly and nice and sweet and kind, but has something to say and will stand up for himself and show somebody who's being annoying and irritating, arguably maybe not in the most grown up way, but show him what needs to be shown,
Yeah.
So I love that about the character. And it's something that I always saw in my grandfather as well, who was mostly the wise, silent, adoring kind of person. But every once in a while, when someone did something stupid, he did not hold back to kind of, you call it out that this is just totally dumb. It shouldn't be done this way. But yeah, before I go any further, had you watched this movie before? And if so, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this is a movie I think is a holiday classic. I've
Yep.
seen and this a lot, and actually the remake that was made in the 90s, I also see a
Hmm.
lot too, and I think is actually a really solid remake and another version of this story that I think works just as well. But this was the first one, so this is the instant classic. I think it's one of the best holiday slash Christmas movies there is out there, and a lot of it is due to that performance as Kris Kringle that he gives. And it's funny you mentioned that moment with the broom. Like for me, it was funny on this rewatch was the first time you see him as Santa, Kris Kringle. He's like walking around the street at the holidays in New York and just like complaining about everything that's wrong. He's like, oh, that's the
Right.
wrong reindeer. This guy's drunk. Some cantankerous, sort of annoyed old man. I'm like, geez, I don't remember him coming across like so. Yeah, it's kind of like cantankerous and but that hey, that's part of being old. Sometimes you're just sort of yelling at things and being like, oh, this is shameful, shameful. He keeps saying, I'm like, damn,
Right.
dude, calm down. Like,
Right.
don't give this guy a hard time. He's probably a working actor who this is the only gig he's got. Yeah, maybe he's a little drunk, but like, I just thought that was really funny. But I think that does make this character, I think, more true to life and real. He's not some perfect idealized, oh, Santa Claus, ho, 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 like, oh, like I'm the Coke commercials. Like, no, he seems like a real guy, but then also seems like authentically like what you would imagine Kris Kringle would be, if there was a Santa Claus, what he would be like. I think it's one of the best performances of the Santa Claus character in a film.
Hmm.
He does such a great job.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And I agree. This is one of the best holiday movies there is.
Yeah.
There's a thin line between get off my lawn, crotchety old person versus, yeah, this person has seen a lot of life
Right.
and some standards need to be upheld. And
Mm-hmm.
there are practical matters like the Macy's Day Parade is for children. And if your Santa is like totally drunk, what could be the consequences of that?
Right. Right.
And some traditions have to be upheld. So, there's like a very thin line between these items. And as I get older, I always try and sort of look at that. Like it's no longer just that, oh, you're just being an annoying old person. I want to try to sort of get at the heart of it and sort of see, and especially when it's being performed by an actor like Edmund Gwenn, like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
want to lean in and listen, I
Mm-hmm.
think, like why? What is going on over there? We haven't mentioned Natalie Wood fully. That's the
Oh, she's so
other
good in this.
kind of amazing pillar of this movie, that the interaction between the two of them is incredible. And once again, like I love, we've had this theme now in a few of our movies like Heidi as well, which is that it's not this taken for granted relationship between a child and a grandparent. Oh, just because we
Mm-hmm.
are family or whatever, although in this case they're not family, so there's not that at play.
Sure. Sure.
But
Sure. Right.
oh, I just love you and like you just because you're sweet, adorable, and you care for me.
Right.
It's a very sort of adult relationship that starts with a little bit of curiosity and intrigue and maybe even dismissal,
Mm-hmm.
but then sort of grows fondly from there. And what I love about Edmund Gwynn's character in that relationship is that, like is my experience with my grandparents, that they always talk to me as if I was an adult. I was
Hmm.
never sort
Right.
of,
Yes.
pushy pushy to that, oh, little blah, blah, blah. I mean, there were
Me too.
moments of
Yeah.
that,
Uh-huh.
but we sat down with my grandfather and talked about things, serious, funny, whatever, but we were
Hmm.
never talked down to. And this is how he is in the movie. Like, he really sees her, he meets her where she's at, and she's also wiser than her years, which
Yeah.
is sort of a key plot point of the movie. So yeah, I just think that's just so beautifully done.
No, she's great. And we were talking about, iconic movie moments. And I
Yeah.
definitely that scene where she tugs on his beard and just that whole interaction is, that isn't a lot of montages for holiday films. And I think that is her. It's just such a great performance, especially in that scene. I also liked this film because it really touches a lot on themes that are still relevant today, just with Christmas and the over commercialization of it. And to be talking about this in 1947 as a major thread in this plot is just very still relevant today, where this is still something that even in modern Christmas movies, there is this theme of like, oh, just trying to make a dollar. Even Elf, which is a modern Christmas classic, his
Right.
the Jimmy Kahn character is basically just trying to make money off of the holiday, but doesn't actually care about it in any meaningful way. And that's where the head capitalist at the store, the Macy's, is like, oh yeah, we'll make, if we look like we're putting profits or putting like care above profits, we'll make more money. So
Right.
I like that line. It's like, oh, well, we'll make it look like we're sending people to other stores if they don't, or we will do that because it'll make us look good, so we'll make more money. So it also still just comes back to money in the end. And the Santa Claus character, Chris Kringle, in this film is against that. It's like, no, it should be about what makes the child happy, not what makes Macy's a buck. I think that's even a line
Right.
that he says in the film. And that to me is what is the heart of what Christmas is about. Not to make it about
Yeah.
the holidays now, but I think this movie just is great in how it weaves that into the plot, but doesn't hit you over the head with it. It's just kind of there. It's not like the capitalists or the villains or anything per se, but it becomes more about this trial. But I still think that is a relevant theme that just works really well in this film.
I totally agree. And I think closely juxtaposed with that theme is another theme of sort of modernity, our belief in what's real and what's not real,
Yes,
and
yes.
versus, tradition and just sort of good home values.
Hmm.
And you can disagree with them, but and I think that push and pull is very relevant today, will always be, there'll
Hmm.
always be new things, there'll be new innovations and developments that'll make us look at life and each other in a different way, and it'll give us the power to question things, which is obviously a good thing. But in the process of doing that, how willing are we to forget simple things, or in my view, the more important things of just love and belief in
Right.
something.
Hmm.
If you question everything, then what are you even for? What are you living for? And I think the movie makes a very good case, literally through the case. Like, the court cases, if you look at it
Yeah.
in an intellectual way, it's just totally bizarre and silly and doesn't make sense. But I guess that's not the point. The point is that, what do you believe in? How do you show up? And that's sort of that. Essentially, you can still
Right.
be critical and intellectual about things, and there's place for that, but there's, I guess, more to life than that, is sort of what the movie is saying.
Right. I mean, the whole point of having a belief is that you can't prove it or not. You just believe it. Like that's sort
Right.
of the point of it. And I think you need to have things like that in your life. Not everything can be proven. There has to be things you just believe in that are
Right.
unproven, and no one ever can ever prove it. And I think that's what the message of this movie is, to your point too, when there's the trial scene of trying to essentially prove that he's Santa Claus or not, is what the trial is trying to do. And I think the movie does a good job of showing that there's an importance in belief, even though the very, very end of the movie, at the movie sort of saying, yeah, he is actually Santa Claus, because they get the house that, he
Right.
promised Natalie Wood's character. So I guess the movie is saying Santa Claus is real. But what I like in the film is that throughout it, you don't really know whether he's real or not, but then it doesn't really matter. It is about just that belief. It doesn't
Right.
matter whether this movie is saying, oh, Chris Kringle is Santa is real. It's just about having it's the power of belief and the importance of that. Even though at the end they try to kind of have their cake and eat it too, and say, he was Santa Claus, so
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
proven. But I think this movie is just it's just fantastic. It's great film.
I couldn't agree more. And yeah, he sells it, right? Like, to your point, you don't know if he's it or no, but you kind of believe it because he is so great in this
Right.
role. Oscar winning, by the way, for this role.
Yeah, he's just so good. But yeah, you're right. Like as an audience member,
You believe it?
you're like, yeah, I actually believe this guy probably is Santa, even though there isn't really any evidence other than his performance in the film until the very end, when again they try to show that he is real. But I think that just again the power of his performance and what this movie can do.
I totally agree. And if I could say one more thing, which is that it's always a good reminder to me, because I saw this with my own grandparents, that yeah, like in this movie, you can sort of ignore Kris Kringle as the old guy or the guy who's finding the faults of what's not right with the world. But if you actually take a little notice and hear him out or sit with them and talk to them, you'll see just so much more wealth of information, wealth of knowledge. I don't know, maybe this is just how I grew up. I was kind of the opposite of you were. I didn't want to hang out with the young kids. I wanted to go and sit with these folks and listen to their stories, because I just found them more interesting always, because the kids of mine were just like running around breaking things, and I was like, you guys are all dumb. I don't
Hey, that's what being a kid's about, running around and breaking things. Yeah.
I was a weird child, clearly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's a good reminder, like, do not, if you see an old person sitting on the bus or whatever, like don't just totally ignore them or look down upon them, because they might have a lot to offer.
They might be Santa Claus. You never know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So any films that did not make the list for you?
Not really on this one. I was trying to think hard. Nothing really jumped to me. How about you?
They're actually the same, to be honest. These three were just so like the first things I thought of, and that were the only ones in my mind, that there wasn't anything else. And I was like, oh, maybe it could be this, maybe it could be this. That's interesting that we both have the same, because I was like, oh no, I don't have anything. Well, maybe you'll have something we could talk about, but I guess both of us are in the same position.
I mean, it also shows that this relationship is not really teased out much in movies.
Oh, that's true. You're right,
that's
actually.
I mean, the closest I came to was Up, perhaps.
But
other than that, there isn't much.
Yeah, that's true. So why don't you tell listeners our theme of our next two episodes, both our bonus episode next week and then the episode we have that's holiday themed this year.
Okay, so our next episode, real episode, is going to be very holiday themed, movies that shaped our feeling of joy. So very excited to get into that. And then for our filmmakers that shaped our love of film series, we are covering the one and only Joaquin Phoenix as one of the actors who shaped our love of film.
That should be very interesting. He's a very interesting actor with a very interesting career.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully everyone enjoyed our discussion today on movies that shaped our relationship with our grandparents. Please be sure to follow us on your podcast platform of choice. We're also available on YouTube as well, where you can see reviews of all the individual movies we covered. And please do, whether it's on YouTube or on your podcast platform, rate us, like us, leave us a review. All these things help other listeners find our content. So with that being said, Ron, talk to you later.
Talk to you later. Cheer up, Charlie. I can't get this song out of my head.
Not bad. I love when we sing on these episodes. It's always fun. We break into song.